And being Friday afternoon, once again, time to welcome Luke Smith from Envision Financial.
Mate, afternoon, Rob.
Good to see you again.
You
doing
too.
Well.
Yep, I'm trying.
We've got a pretty common but a very serious sort of subject this week. One to consider if you're in the unfortunate situation where you're separating.
Yes, look, exactly. Last week we talked about powers of attorney, and the week before that we talked about, the importance of a will. And this is one that we see a lot from a planning perspective, where people will come in and say, how do we do this? What do we consider in relation to assets? And I guess today we're really just going to raise some of the things people should think about.
It can be quite a stressful time when this is happening too. Very stressful.
Look, this is something that, it'd be a horrible experience to have to go through. And from a financial planning perspective, not a good way to build your asset base. So it's really about just thinking about...
Way to empty it.
Well, exactly right. You can unravel, 15 or 20 years of really good saving with a strike of a pen. So this is more just about saying, what should you think about demystifying a few myths in relation to, what your mates have said at the pub, and then obviously thinking about what could happen or how you could better protect yourself in relation to, moving forwards or going into a new relationship.
So I guess we can start right at the very beginning with estate planning.
Yeah, look, some of the things people should really think about, are obviously if you have separated, make sure you review your will documentation. We talked about the importance of a will, a couple of weeks ago. And this is something that obviously if you've separated from somebody and you don't update this document, then there's every likelihood that if something did unfortunately happen to you, monies could get directed to somebody that you obviously don't want them to have. So, be mindful of that. Also then review your binding nominations through superannuation. As we touched on a couple of weeks ago, your will does not empower or control your superannuation assets, and a binding nomination is a way of passing assets out of superannuation, potentially to your state or to somebody else. So it's something that people should obviously be mindful of and review, because if that receiving individual is no longer there, there's no point leaving them in a superannuation fund. And last week we spoke about powers of attorney. So if you've given the power to somebody to act as if they are you, you may want to revoke that if they're not your biggest fan at the moment, because they may not actually act in your best interest, which could have some rather dire financial or medical consequences. The other thing people should think about if they are going to separate is who controls the structures that you operate. Obviously, we've got potentially family trusts, unit trusts, and companies involved in business operations, but also wealth accumulation. Are you in a self-managed super fund with somebody that now you're no longer in love with? What are the implications there? So who controls the entities that you have, and do you need to make some changes in relation to who are the directors of corporate trustees and who is a member of the fund? There are always amicable ways to resolve these sorts of things, but being cognizant of them and being aware of the potential implications is very, very important. I guess the last one I think about is, where are your accounts and who has access to them? They say possession is 9/10 of the law in the movies. And if 9/10 of your money was removed out of a bank account by somebody that has access to it, it may not be a great outcome for the individual that doesn't have access to that money. So be mindful of those sorts of things. And I guess through all of this, get legal help. Everybody's situation is different. And what happened to your mates, or the lady you work with, or the guy you play golf with, may not be appropriate for you, and the outcome could be rather dire by assuming that your situation's similar to others.
Okay, well, when it comes to splitting things up, what are some of the assumptions people make that they really should think seriously about?
Yeah, look, we have people come in all the time, through this and sort of say, well, what do we do about the superannuation and what do we do about our assets? And obviously it's driven by what happens with your solicitors and the agreements that you have with the other party to the transaction. If things can be amicable, that's great, no problems at all. You can separate superannuation. And how superannuation gets split up is then dependent on the outcome agreed to with the solicitors that are involved. The assumption that the wife always gets the kids is a bit of a misnomer, because obviously it really depends on the broader situation. It's always 50-50. Well, we know that that's not the case, but obviously people like to start there and either move north or south from that number. But again, it would depend on who's representing you and your broader situations. Your super's safe. A lot of people come in and say, oh, it's okay, it's my super. Well, super's just another asset that's in the pool of separation. So if you're talking about breaking up a combined value between two individuals, superannuation is in the mix. And then for those of you out there that are in a defined benefit scheme like CSS or PSS or DFRDB or MSBS, they're not immune to separating those either. So in that situation, it'll come down to having somebody represent you to get the best outcome in relation to your broader planning needs. You could give part of a lump sum component to a spouse. You could retain the pension component of the fund. It really depends on the structure of the fund that you're in and the way that you'd like to be able to continue forward financially and getting an outcome that everybody would agree to. So don't think that superannuation isn't on the table, because it is. And obviously then, if things are amicable, this is one that some good legal advice can save you a lot of money. Let's say the two of you agree to take your own supers and one party buys the other party out of the family home and everybody agrees to it, and that's fine. If there isn't a solicitor involved, there may be stamp duty implications for the purchasing individual buying out the other side. Now, that's significantly different to getting some legal advice where the stamp duty considerations may be waived. So again, don't assume, get some advice, because the cost of stamp duty on your average property in the ACT is going to be far more than a couple of $1,000 getting some advice to protect your biggest asset base as you either accumulate or watch part of it walk out the door.
There seems to be an assumption that the female part of the partnership, spouse or whatever, automatically gets a house. Not quite.
Yeah, well, as I say,
that's an assumption.
Yeah,
possibly a misconception too.
Look, exactly right, and I preface it by saying, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so we don't give specific legal advice, but yeah, that is something that you generally hear in the pub or on the golf course. But again, depending on who you have representing you, and this is one of the things I stress to people: don't leave these things to chance. You work very hard to save money, build equity in a home, build up superannuation, and all of the other strategic considerations that you take on board. Protect what you've got, fight for what you've got, and try and get an amicable result that obviously suits both parties, because especially where there's kids involved, it's going to be a very, very difficult process that I couldn't imagine having to go through, but it's a problem nonetheless, and obviously the outcome for all parties involved, the better it can be and the better informed and advised you are, obviously the greater comfort you have with the outcome.
So I guess the key takeout there, Luke, would be to update your will for a start.
Yeah, look, exactly. If you have separated, update your will. You can't get divorced for 12 months, but that doesn't mean you can't die. So obviously review that, review your binding nominations within superannuation, review who controls the entities that you use, be it a company or a family trust or any manifestation of that. And don't assume that what happened to your friends is going to happen to you. So get some specific advice and make sure you're informed.
Okay, we're speaking with Luke Smith from Envision Financial. We'll take a break and come back in just a moment. Don't go away. We're back with Luke Smith from Envision Financial. We're talking this week about what to consider when separating. And we've already gone through how stressful a time that can be. But Luke, what should people consider when they're bringing together assets into a new relationship?
Yeah, look, this is something that we raise with people of all ages, because obviously depending on your stage of life and what you bring to a new relationship, protecting your assets is something that's very, very important. So if we have gone through a separation and we're moving into something else with someone else, and everything's still cupcakes and rainbows and everybody's in love, a binding financial agreement is something that you bring to people's attention, commonly referred to as that old school prenup or prenuptial agreement in the movies, actually have a lot of value.
Well, that only happened in America.
Well, exactly. It's, again, one of those misconceptions that these things are actually real documents that have a lot of value. So if you have come out of a separation and say you have a house and your partner has her super and you're coming together as a unit and you decide to live together, or any manifestation of that, having a clear line in the sand in relation to what you're bringing to a relationship, I think is really important, actually quite prudent. And it doesn't say anything in relation to how much you do or don't love somebody. It's more about reflecting on the experience that you've just gone through, be it positive or negative, and then just trying to risk manage, what happens in the future, just like you would with the investment profile of your super fund. You manage that in relation to the amount of risk you're prepared to take. From personal insurance standpoint, you manage the loss of income and the continuity of earnings. And for me, a binding financial agreement is exactly that. It's just saying, right, I'm bringing this to the table, you're bringing that to the table. If anything we do together, we do as a unit, okay? We can cut that down the middle, but these are mine and these are yours. And if we do go our separate ways, then obviously you walk out with what you walk in with. And, that's the general premise of it. Now, obviously, you must get advice in relation to this sort of documentation, because it's my understanding from the lawyers that I talk to, both parties must get independent advice in relation to this. So don't use the same person when drawing one of these up. Get one party to do it and then take it to your solicitor and make sure it's checked and you understand the implications of what you're doing.
Well, there'd be a conflict of interest there anyway, wouldn't there?
Well, yeah, you would assume that, it'd be very difficult to be independent for both parties. So that's why, they generally say go and get it, drawn up and then get it reviewed by your own independent counsel. And also preface this by saying that nothing's foolproof. These sorts of things are in place, and, I understand that in certain situations, courts can overturn these things. But again, if you've done it with the best of intentions and you've gone into it with your eyes open, I think a lot of clients come to us with either a bitter taste in their mouth, or they've had to rebuild and try and do something that may accelerate their asset accumulation or require them to be a little bit more focused on their budgeting and their saving to try and recoup what may or may not have been lost. And this is a very good way to move forward and say, well, yeah, I can be in love again, I can be with somebody, and we can have A, B, and C. But I know that what I'm bringing, it's been recognised at the start. And I say do that at the start because if things do turn sour, it's very difficult to have something retrospectively put in place when somebody's turned and don't love you the way they loved you 2 or 3 years ago. Because then I think it's fair game.
So it is quite a transformation, say, if you take the whole thing that we've been talking about today by separating, you're getting out of one relationship, or either whether you want to or not, you're getting out of it. And then you're forming a new relationship, and there's a lot of crossover stuff there, especially when it comes to superannuation.
Exactly, and a binding financial agreement is not just something that's prospective going into a new relationship. You can have a binding financial agreement, as I understand it, where you agree to separate your assets, and a solicitor draws these things up to say, okay, we've agreed to take this and you have that, and a binding financial agreement has that sort of application as well. So it's not just leading into a new relationship, it's actually the same terminology for wrapping up, where you can come to an amicable outcome. A binding financial agreement can say, right, you have this, I have that, and a solicitor can assist you through that process as well. So it's really something that you must get professional advice on. It's not the sort of thing you copy your friends and change a few key points, because, as we've touched on, last week or the week before with the will, the wording and the language and the terminology used in these things is vital. So don't leave this to chance, because if you've come out the backside of, something that wasn't a pleasant experience, don't race back into something new and perform the same mistakes or undertake the same mistakes that made you upset about the last relationship. And I liken it to people selling at the bottom of the market because they don't have anyone to talk to. When they're sweating and panicking and can't see the wood from the trees, people generally repeat their behaviours. Somebody said in 08 that, in a previous GFC-like environment, they sold, and then they display those same behaviours again in 08 and 09. And this is something that you obviously don't want to repeat, because you could have had a positive or a negative experience through the separation. And people work very hard to save for their retirement, and you don't want to hand it over unnecessarily. So, it's something that you need to get advice on.
Well, you always say that you're not a lawyer, you don't give advice, and we'll go through some of the people who do give advice in just a moment. But just generally speaking, Luke, when you get clients in, how often or how seldom is there a real sort of underlying problem there by who's going to benefit from this one? It must be very hard even as a financial planner.
Oh, look, it's extremely difficult to, work with people for many, many years who then end up separating for whatever reason.
No,
and
that's
then
what I was thinking.
trying to get to the bottom of what's fair and amicable. And I guess we then become the sounding board, especially with third parties like lawyers involved, to say, okay, well, what is a fair separation of this? Give us your opinion on these assets, this structure. And we sort of then become part of the team to get through that experience with the legal counsel that you engage, so that everybody's informed, everybody's aware of what's going on, and everybody has felt that they've been involved in what's happening. So, again, it's important that people engage a team of people around them, because it's a horrible thing to go through, and you shouldn't have to do it by yourself, and you shouldn't feel alone. And it's
you got a few names here.
Yeah, look, again, my go-to guys, obviously Kellen Christopherson from Artisan Law, very, very good listener, very, very good explainer, and Mark Peretti from Trinity Law. Both of those guys can help you draw these documents up and make you aware of things that you may not know about, make you aware of things that could make the document that much more powerful. And then look, if you get to the point where you have gone through a separation, or you're thinking about going through a separation, and you want to send in Mr. Separation, Mr. Separation for me is Adam Back.
Okay.
He's at Farage, Assini and Dunn, and I'll tell you, if I was going into war, he'd be my wingman. I'll tell you that much. So yeah, if you really want to swing for the fence and have a crack, Adam Back's your man from Farage, Assini and Dunn.
Okay, from what we've been talking about today, Luke, where can people get more information?
Yeah, look, again, if you don't have somebody that can help you with these documents, or you don't know, who can give you this sort of advice, we can refer you to a solicitor that we know, who we've used in the past. The important thing about that is we know how they work, we know how they think, and we've had a long-standing relationship with these people. So, you're in safe hands. Obviously, they can go to www.envisionfinancial.com.au. They can go to the resources tab there and go into the knowledge centre and look at all of these sorts of things are in there in written and in video form. So you can have a bit of delve into the data there. The strategy stack at Luke Talks Money on iTunes, and obviously Envision Financial Canberra on YouTube, where we've got the show and the key takeouts, and you can pause and have a listen and get some numbers and names and go from there. So
Great stuff. Okay, we'll catch up this time next week. Have a good week.
See you next week.
Luke Smith from Envision Financial.